it took me many years to find the courage to tell this. Even today, when I remember that night, the first thing that comes back to my mind is not the creature, it's the silence. A heavy, strange silence, as if the forest itself had held its breath. We were already close to leaving the woods when we heard that branch snap in the darkness. A dry crack, loud, much too close. My father stopped immediately, my uncle too. And then something enormous rose from the shadows, right in front of us. If I had understood earlier what that silence meant, maybe I would never have entered those woods on that full moon night. I was 16 years old when everything happened. Back then, I still believed that stories from the countryside were just exaggerations told by people who liked to scare others. Today, I'm not so sure about that anymore. My father, Antonio, worked in a workshop in Belo Horizonte. When he managed to get a few days off, he decided that the two of us would visit my grandmother, Donna Maria, who lived on a remote farm in the countryside of Minas Gerais. Anyone who has spent time in the countryside knows how these places work. The houses are far from each other, surrounded by dense forest, red dirt roads, and a silence that sometimes feels too big. The trip was long. We took my father's old car early in the morning and drove deep into the countryside. As the city fell behind us, the world seemed to slow down. The asphalt turned into dirt, the sound of cars disappeared, and all that remained was the wind moving through the fields. After hours of driving, we finally turned onto the small road that led to the farm. It was another 20 minutes bouncing through dust before the gate appeared between the trees. My grandmother's property was large and surrounded by forest on every side. The house stood in the middle of a small clearing. It was an old wooden construction with 2 bedrooms downstairs and 2 more on the upper floor. The first thing that always caught people's attention in that house was the silence. The rooms were large and almost empty. The wooden floor creaked with every step. The staircase leading upstairs groaned so loudly that sometimes it sounded like someone was climbing it even when nobody was there. I spent the afternoon helping my father with small chores in the yard. The sun began to sink behind the trees, and the typical countryside smell of damp earth started rising from the ground. At some point, I ended up dozing off. I woke up when my father called me for dinner. I was still half asleep when I sat at the table. My grandmother had prepared simple food, the kind that tastes even better after a long day on the road. After dinner, everyone started getting ready to sleep early. My father mentioned that the next day he intended to go into the woods with my Uncle Raimundo to hunt. I didn't pay much attention at the time. I would only realize the next day that decision would completely change my life. Early in the morning, I woke up to the sound of people moving around the house. My father and my uncle were already dressed in hunting clothes, separating backpacks and equipment. Well, tarde, call-me Lucas. Do me a favor. Go to esse little store and buy some gunpowder. I found it strange. Gunpowder for what, Dad? He answered as if it were the most normal thing in the world. For the rifle. We'll need it. I took the money and left. The path to the small store wasn't very far, but it was lonely. The dirt road ran between tall trees that almost touched high above. Even in daylight, that stretch always had a constant shadow. When I got there, a few men were sitting on the sidewalk drinking beer and talking. One of them, Mr. Joachim, was telling a story. And from the silence of the others, you could tell it wasn't just any story. I stood near the door of the little store waiting for my turn to buy the gunpowder. But I ended up listening to the conversation. Mr. Joachim held the bottle tightly while speaking, his voice low and serious. It was on a full moon night. The kind that lights everything up as if it were daytime. No one interrupted. He said he was returning along the creek road when he noticed something moving at the edge of the forest. At first, he thought it was just a big dog wandering along the road. But the more he looked, the stranger it seemed. The thing moved slowly, heavily, as if it had difficulty walking through the shadows of the trees. That was when he realized it wasn't walking on four legs like a normal animal. Mr. Joachim tightened his grip on the bottle before continuing. His voice sounded even lower now, almost a whisper that forced everyone to listen carefully. It was Tolri sighed slowly. One of the men asked what exactly he had seen on that road. For a few seconds he stared at the ground, as if deciding whether he should really keep telling that story in front of everyone. He finally took a deep breath before answering. He said that at first glance it looked like a man standing at the side of the road, but something was wrong with that silhouette. The body was far too large and covered with dark fur that reflected the moonlight. The snout was long like an animal's, and the eyes shone with a dull yellow glow in the darkness. No one laughed at the story. No one made jokes. That was what caught my attention the most at that moment. Mr. Joachim continued, saying that the creature then stood completely upright on its hind legs and lifted its head toward the sky. That was when it released a long, sad, horrible howl that echoed through the forest around the road. According to him, the smell coming from that thing was unbearable, a strong mix of wild animal and wet earth. While he spoke, the men around him remained in absolute silence, as if the story were too serious to become a joke. At that moment, I thought it was just another countryside tale. Anyone who grows up hearing stories knows there's always someone willing to exaggerate a little to make things scarier. Even so, I listened until the end. When the conversation ended, I went into the little store, bought the gunpowder my father had asked for, and thanked Mr. Just soon after, I returned along the same dirt road I had come from, walking back to the farm. During the walk back, I kept thinking about the story I had just heard. At that moment, I told myself it was probably just one of those old legends that circulate in the countryside. Even so, there was something in the way the men had reacted that left me uneasy. No one had laughed. No one had doubted it. That thought kept echoing in my head as I walked back along the silent road. When I got back to the farm, the rest of the day passed quietly, with nothing unusual happening. I helped my father with a few things in the yard and tried not to think about that story from the store anymore. But when night came, something felt different in the air. It was a full moon night, and the wind began to blow stronger through the trees, making the branches move slowly, as if the forest itself were whispering something in the darkness. The rest of the day had been calm on the farm, nothing out of the ordinary. But when night arrived, something felt different in the air. It was a full moon night, and the wind began to blow strongly, making the trees move as if they were whispering to each other. My father and my uncle finished preparing for the hunt. When they were leaving through the gate, I gathered the courage and asked if I could go with them. My father thought for a few seconds before answering. "You can come, but you won't touch any weapons," he said firmly. Before leaving, my father handed me an old machete. Just in case, we entered the forest shortly after. Anyone who has never walked through a forest at night might not understand how strange it is. The darkness feels alive. Moonlight passed through a few openings between the treetops, but most of the path was swallowed by deep shadows that moved slowly with the wind. We walked in silence for a long time. The sound of dry leaves cracking under our steps seemed far too loud in that quiet forest. At one point, we stopped in a clearing and managed to kill a large wild pig there. My father and my uncle were satisfied with the hunt. We were already preparing to return when something suddenly changed. First came the absolute silence. No crickets, no frogs, no sounds from the forest around us. Anyone who knows the countryside knows that this isn't normal. The forest is never completely silent. After that strange silence came the wind. A cold wind coming from the north, strong enough to make thick branches sway high above us. My father looked around and said it would probably start raining heavily soon. Even so, at that moment I had the clear feeling that it wasn't just that. We kept walking, trying to ignore the strange sensation in the air. The smell of wet earth grew stronger as the night advanced. From time to time the wind passed through the treetops, producing a long sound, almost like a sigh. I remembered the story I had heard at the little store earlier. At that moment it still seemed like a coincidence. Even so, a question started forming in my mind and repeated itself again and again. What if Mr. Joaquin wasn't exaggerating? I pushed that thought away several times, but it kept returning whenever I looked at the shadows between the ancient trees. The silence remained heavy, as if the entire forest were watching our steps and waiting for something to happen. I couldn't explain why, but the feeling of danger grew stronger with every minute. Even without seeing anything, I had the clear impression that we were not alone in that forest that night. And it was exactly at that moment that it happened. A sharp crack echoed ahead in the darkness. The sound of a thick branch breaking somewhere in the woods. My father stopped immediately and raised his hand asking for silence. My uncle froze as well. The three of us stood there listening, trying to understand where the sound had come from. The wind kept moving through the trees, but now it seemed like something was slowly moving among the shadows. We were already close to leaving the forest when we heard the crack, a branch breaking right in front of us. We all stopped at the same time. My heart started beating so hard it seemed to echo inside my head. Then something slowly emerged from the darkness. First I noticed the height. It was far too big to be any normal animal. Then the shape began to appear under the moonlight, revealing a silhouette that didn't seem to belong to any known creature. When the creature stepped further into the light, I could see it better. It had the body of a man, but it was completely covered in short black fur. The arms were far too long and the hands ended in curved claws. The face was the worst part. It looked like an impossible hybrid between a man and a wolf. The elongated snout kept its teeth permanently exposed, as if it were growling all the time. And the eyes shone with a dull, hungry yellow. My father turned completely pale when he saw it. "My holy mother, it's the werewolf," he murmured almost without a voice. Even so, he still tried to shout for the creature to go back where it came from in the name of God. The thing didn't answer. Instead, it raised its head toward the sky and released a long howl that echoed through the entire forest. The sound seemed filled with pain and rage at the same time. Right after that howl, the creature charged toward us. The movement was strange, almost clumsy but frighteningly fast. My Uncle Raymondo reacted on pure instinct. He raised the rifle and fired twice. The shots echoed among the trees and sent birds flying into the darkness. The creature stopped for a moment and released a deep grunt that seemed to come from deep inside its chest. For a moment I thought it would fall, but instead it slowly backed away into the forest, growling low. Within seconds, the creature completely disappeared among the trees, with their anibalt to Marvinowing. We could only hear our own rapid breathing. Then we did the only thing anyone would do in that situation. We ran. We left the dead wild pig behind without thinking twice. As we ran along the trail, we heard, from deep within the forest, one last long and sorrowful howl echoing through the darkness. When we finally reached the farm, we were out of breath, sweaty, and covered in dirt and in the blood of the wild pig we had killed. My grandmother asked what that blood was. My father simply replied that we had shot a pig, but that the animal was still alive and had escaped. No one insisted much on the subject that night. We never told her the truth. A few days later, we returned to Belo Horizonte as if nothing had happened. But that night never completely left my mind. Years later, I began researching what we had seen in the forest. I discovered many old stories about the werewolf, the cursed man who transforms on full moon nights. I don't know exactly what we encountered that night, But one thing I know for certain, every time I hear a distant howl during a clear night, I immediately remember those yellow eyes watching us from the darkness. For a long time, I tried to convince myself that there had to be another explanation. Maybe it was just a large animal that appeared in front of us that night, or some illusion caused by the darkness of the forest. But the more I remembered the details, the less sense that made. The creature's posture was far too human. The eyes had far too much awareness. And that howl didn't sound like the cry of a lost animal. After that night, my father never again mentioned hunting in that place. My Uncle Raymondo also avoided bringing up the subject. It was as if all of us had made a silent agreement to simply move on and pretend that nothing had happened. But there are things that don't disappear just because we decide not to talk about them. Some memories keep returning even after many years. Sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, I still remember that howl echoing through the forest. And the feeling comes back immediately. The same feeling of standing in front of something that does not belong to our world. Maybe it's just an old countryside legend. Maybe there is some explanation that I was never able to discover. But there is one thing I learned that night and never forgot. If one day you are walking through a silent forest on a full moon night and hear a distant howl that sounds far too sad to belong to an ordinary animal, do yourself a favor. Don't try to find out where that sound came from. Some things are better when they remain hidden in the darkness of the forest, because not everything that lives in the woods truly belongs to our world. At night,